by saying that it's actually quite difficult to remember this time last year. Not necessarily in terms of an age issue of remembering this time last year, but just the contrast with this time last year and the climate movement. I mean, this time last year, the profile, the level of understanding amongst the public and within the trade union movement of the climate issue is not that it wasn't there, but there has been a transformative step forward in the space of less than a year. And we do have to, you know, recognise that we're in a qualitatively different situation, both in terms of the climate emergency and our understanding, climate ecological emergency and our understanding of it, but also the platform and the position that we are now in to make the changes that we know need to happen as part of a bigger climate movement, but also within the trade union movement. We do have to say some thanks here for that transformation of the position. There is a thanks to the IPCC report that came out last October, because I think it did set the tone, it changed the kind of nature of the debate that was happening. I'll come back to that. But the biggest thanks clearly have to go to the school climate strikers and to XR. And now there has been an extraordinary global awakening. A huge process of education that has gone on deep in society, and as I say, the creation of a global climate movement that is asserting the need for change and asserting the possibility of the urgent change that we need. The 20th of September was clearly another turning point in the creation of that global climate movement, and I do want to state some thanks really to, I mean, around the world, 7 million people on strike or taking action as close as they could get it to strike action on the climate emergency. I just want to mention, looking at the pictures of what happened here in Leeds today, on that day, it was clearly a significant key moment, and thanks to all of those people who led strikes, organised in the trade union movement, especially to take people out on the 20th of September. And then just finally, the global climate strikes have been significant. The school students, what they have done on every single level, but it's all been significant because they have reminded us of the power of collective action. The power of collective action. And if we're to do any of the things that Jeffery spoke about earlier and that I will speak about now, the power of collective action will be absolutely central to whether or not we are able to bring about the changes that we need. And just finally to the XR rebels, clearly debates will emerge around the question of specific actions that have taken place, and all right and proper that those do. But I won't take this criticism from the Boris Johnsons of this world, from the government, the ramshackle government that he has put together of the XR rebels. You guys don't have the pleasure of the Evening Standard up here in Leeds, lucky old you, but picking up this copy last week, October the 20th, it was, and an article by Andrea Lebsam, and this is, I'm going to pick up on some of the key arguments in this article because this is what we have to look at. This is a pushback now. It's not climate denial, we can't do that anymore, but it's a pushback on the targets. We can't possibly meet 2030 targets. It's completely unrealistic, and it's really attempting to do what Trump does and Bolsonaro does, which is to attempt to win a working class base of support for the most reactionary of ideas and the most reactionary of policies. But she finishes this article here full of crap of the most enormous order, but crap that we have to pay heed to, because it will be the key arguments they use to push it back against the climate movement and within the trade union, try and split the trade union movement within the climate movement. And she finishes up like this. She says here, blah, 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 significant draw on police resources, Extinction Rebellion, cost £16 million to police. This is from the government who have cut austerity year in, year out. 16 million is peanuts. What are they talking about when they try and use these figures? She says here, it is only right that anyone who significantly disrupts the lives of others should face the full force of the law. Now there's Priti Patel speaking for you there, isn't there? So crucially, they're attempting to create a hostile environment for people of colour, for environmental activists, and for our climate. And And it turns out, and this is a contradiction we have to keep pointing out, it is actually legal to wreck the planet, but it appears that it's illegal to protest or strike to defend the planet. And that is a contradiction that we have to unravel in favour of all of us who want to stand up and protect the climate and the planet that we live on. So, Jeffery was talking about climate justice, social, ecological and climate justice, and I just want to move on to this. The climate issue is a trade union issue. It's a trade union issue for all kinds of reasons. Let me just give the two key primary reasons. It's a trade union issue because there is a difference in the way that the people who have contributed least will impact, the impacts will be greatest of them. We're right to understand that in terms of a climate justice issue, we're right to understand it in terms of the global south. 1 billion people still live without electricity. Those people are suffering the impacts of climate change the greatest, and their historic and their current real-time contribution to climate change is negligible, is zero, is nothing. But we also have to understand that those differential contributions and impacts are ones that cut across class in the richest parts of the world also. So those in the richest parts of the world who have contributed least to the problem of climate change are those who are experiencing the impacts the quickest, are least able to mitigate against it. Jeffery made a very important point earlier on when he said, you know, the solutions should not replicate and reinforce those inequalities and those injustices, and it's absolutely central to it. It's a trade union issue because the poorest have contributed least will be expected to pay the consequences at the highest level. And there are some extraordinary stories coming out about that. I read an article in The Guardian a few weeks ago about Las Vegas and the extreme temperatures experienced currently within Las Vegas and how that's impacting on the poor. And literally people cannot leave their homes. They can't survive. The poor can't survive in their homes, but they can't leave their homes either. The devastating impacts of heat on the poorest people in America at this moment in time. It's a trade union issue because I think we will find that those who are experiencing high profits on the basis of the current economic system that we've got and the neoliberal system that has turbocharged everything in the last 20 are the exact same people that are pushing against our working conditions, are pushing back against our pay. There's not a discrepancy here. Those who are hanging on to their profits from a system invested in fossil fuels are exactly the same people who are benefiting from that, whilst also pushing back against the rest of us in terms of decent working lives, decent working conditions, pay, length of time that we work, holidays, all of those kind of things. So we have the same enemies on both fronts. We have the same enemies in terms of our everyday practice as trade unionists of defending our pay terms and conditions, and we have the same enemies in terms of those people who are obstacles to actually delivering the changes that we need. The rich, the powerful, the multinationals who prioritise their own profits over the interests of those people who work within those industries and in terms of the planet. So we have to really now take the opportunities of a growing climate movement, I think within the trade union movement, to put on the agenda the organisation and the type of policies that we are fighting for, that we are getting behind to deliver that just transformation. And that must include, as people have mentioned it, policies within our own union, and I do want people to think about their own union or to think about the policies that our own unions have. Are they meeting the science? Do they reflect the science? Or are they policies that haven't really quite understood or acknowledged the scale of the climate crisis and therefore are kind of fudging some of the things that we need to have in terms of policies within our own unions? And secondly, it is about good, secure, well-paid trade union jobs and skilled jobs. And the Green New Deal, the motion that was passed by the Labour Party conference, was a stunningly good piece of policy passed by the Labour Party conference just a few weeks ago, which has identified the scale of the crisis and which has begun to talk about the social transformation. People talk about a just transition quite rightly, but we should also be talking about a just transformation, because that's what we need, a just transformation of a society to tackle the climate crisis. I want to just, I think have I got like 5-ish minutes left, something like that. I want to just finish in those five-ish minutes I've got left by talking about some of the work that we've done within Campaign Against Climate Change, our trade union group, and this is more on the kind of like, I mean, I hesitate to call it policy because we are a small campaigning organisation, so we don't have the huge resources of some of the formal trade unions or of education institutions. But it is the kind of policy work of what we could be calling for. Please frame it within the concept of a Green New Deal, because I really do think that is a really useful concept for us to have, and some of the detail of the Green New Deal past the Lake Point Conference is important. But I just want to add a little bit in terms of some of the work that we have done. And before I forget this, I went to see Naomi Klein speak earlier this week in London. She has a new book out called On Fire. And I haven't read the book yet. I have a copy of it. But can I just say, her speech was fantastic. I would really recommend, if you get an opportunity, to hear some of what she's saying as she tours, if she does tour. But she introduced it with a fantastic little video clip, maybe, I don't know, I had time at the conference today, called A Message from the Future. And I don't know, has anyone seen it? Yeah, okay, so one person. A Message from the Future. It's narrated by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and it kind of outlines the Green New Deal, the idea of a Green New Deal in the US. It's absolutely brilliant, and one of the things I like most of all about what she did is she did talk about the need for us still to have hope. I mean, I don't see what else we can have other than hope. What do you do with the information? You know, the information is as it is. It's a reality. We have to do everything we have for people to understand that reality. But then we have to take that knowledge, and the only thing it feels to me that we can do with it is actually fight. You know, fight for the changes that we need. Have hope that we can deliver those changes that we need in the timescale that we need to do it in. And I think this little video clip just really does that brilliantly. It kind of positions the idea of a person in the future speaking to us, in the future, looking back at what's happened and talking about how the climate and ecological crisis, you know, sped up in the 2020s. But how there was this huge response, and that was the moment at which people fought for a Green New Deal. The Green New Deal was implemented, and then it's the kind of like story of what people did, the jobs that people had, the society that people created in order to respond to the climate and ecological crisis. And one's still damaged by the climate and ecological crisis, but it was nevertheless transformed by that moment in history when it was understood that there was a need to act, and a need to act in that way, creating jobs which could tackle the climate crisis and transforming society so that those who are that have the least power began to be the most influential. You know, we organised collectively to find solutions, and we also looked at how the positive social impacts that somebody asked about before, the positive social impacts that began to transform how we lived our lives on a daily basis, as well as tackling the climate crisis. So I want to just finish with a few things. I know that many people will have read our report, a 1 Million Climate Jobs report, which initially came out 10 years ago. I do like to feel that we played a contribution in opening up this debate about what kind of, the two things are not mutually exclusive. That tackling the climate crisis is not a situation which means that therefore loads of people try again. That the interests of tackling the climate crisis are mutually exclusive from the interests of trade unions and their desire to defend pay terms and conditions and good employment. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. We updated a couple of times, but I want to pick out of it three things that I think are worth thinking about as we go forward. One, what we talked about in here is climate jobs. And we used the word climate jobs rather than green jobs explicitly so, because we wanted to create a category of work which would actually be impactful on reducing emissions. So not that the low carbon jobs aren't important, the transformation of the economy that you spoke about, but a specific category of jobs that actually impacted on reducing emissions. In our report, we identified an 87% reduction in emissions that could take place within 20 years through the creation of 1 million climate jobs. So these were clearly jobs in categories where if those jobs were created and or transition was moved away to new jobs away from high carbon intensive industries, a reduction in emissions would take place of 87% over 20 years. I really would encourage people to revisit that concept of the climate job, to be looking at those areas of our economy which are our high carbon emitting areas of the economy. And they're not necessarily, as Jeffery said earlier on, all in terms of energy. Energy is clearly central to it, but there is a whole range of areas in which we're high emitting in our energy. And I want to just mention four that are here in the pamphlet, and they are not exclusive. There are others, sorry. One obviously is energy. The second is buildings. Both domestic and commercial and public buildings use and then waste huge amounts of energy. So if we were, as we talked about it in here, in the place of creating jobs which would be about insulating and draft proofing and maintaining local energy systems, we're talking about a large number of jobs which would have a huge impact on actually reducing energy use in our buildings, which contribute to a huge amount of our energy use. Transport was mentioned before, and somebody talked about buses, but we would really have to take this incredibly seriously. Cars emit twice the emissions of underground and light railways, 2 times the emissions of trains, 4 times the emissions of intercity coaches. And if we're thinking about climate jobs are those jobs in a proper public transport system, which does allow people to get out of their cars and still travel around, and does not also trap people in their homes. Because at the moment we have a transport system where people are actually forced to use cars because they have no other means, or they're trapped in their homes in many circumstances. And we need a public transport system that's aiming of climate jobs, that's aiming to reduce emissions and allow people to travel efficiently and sustainably, and also actually lead lives that are social and engaged with other people and not get stuck in their homes. And I said 3 things. Have I mentioned 3 things? I have, but there are so many others. And waste was mentioned, and it was up on Jeffery's list. We tend to talk about recycling, but actually, our huge wastage comes from single-use everything. And we hardly ever reuse or reduce. And Jeffery made a point about reduce, but also reuse. And just to think about the kind of jobs that could be created in reuse, and how and repair, and how locally based those jobs could be, where we don't even have those systems in place anymore. If you want something repaired, where do you go to get something repaired? It doesn't exist anymore, so people chuck stuff away and buy new, and we have to think in terms of that. 2 things to finish. I was really pleased to see in the Labour Party policy that was passed a national climate service, because this was one of the key arguments that we put forward in 1 million climate jobs, of a national climate service. At best at the moment, we have a piecemeal system, but we have to work quickly and we have to work urgently. So the idea of a piecemeal system, semi-reliant on the public sector to make the transformations that we need, is no longer meaningful. A national climate service was conceived in the same way as a national health service was conceived. What's the need, and how do we mobilise to meet that need? So what is the need of a climate emergency, and how do we mobilise to meet that need? And clearly one of the mechanisms for mobilising to meet that need has to be through the intervention of government, of state, and the mobilisation of government state resources to meet the needs of a climate emergency. And that means that public ownership absolutely has to be at the heart of a national climate service, public ownership of our energy systems, public ownership of our public transport systems, and public ownership of loads more other things if we are truly going to meet the climate emergency. And that means that those 2 things, I think, of the idea of a national climate service and climate jobs, where people are actually centrally playing a part in terms of good, well-paid, trade union organised, highly skilled jobs, are badged as part of a national climate service. What is your job? I'm part of a national climate service. What is your job? I have a climate job. I am meeting the needs of a climate emergency. What's behind you? What's behind me is the public will and all the resources of a national government and publicly owned utilities meeting the needs of a climate emergency. That's the vision that we have to have. It really, really is within our grasp, I think, to take this moment, as that lovely little video said, and to turn the corner on both meeting the climate emergency and transitioning our society in a society that meets the needs of the people who live on the planet, meets the needs of the climate, and meets the needs of a different kind of society against the interests of a small minority who so far held us to ransom, where they've met their own needs and their own profit-hungry needs and wrecked the planet in the course of doing that. So I look forward to an opportunity to work with as many people as possible in that huge social, just transformation of our society.